Oh, hello. All right, let's get started here. So today we're going to go over a drum and bass tune that I made a couple years ago, experimenting in a different style of drum and bass. This kind of example, this more um, deep, minimal, dark drum and bass that's not as focused on like big like Reese bass leads or something, more of like low bass kind of rolling like that. So yeah, we're just listening to stuff that we're going to be using as a reference track there. So I have that up at the top of the project. And then, yeah, welcome to the rest of the track. We'll open that up here and we'll start going through it. Okay, so we're just we'll start by listening to it. We'll give some of it a listen, and then start talking about it. So let's see. I've got my rack on the master, my mixing rack on the main channel, um, and then that's this one down here. I just have a bunch of plugins here that we'll walk through later. Then I've got just a utility managing the level for the streaming plugin that's here. That is just streaming it to my OBS, and then here I've got my headphone monitoring software. So these plugins over here, that's what I've got going on there. And yeah, then I've got this visualizer plugin. We can see the spectrum of it a bit. We'll go over that later in a second. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Okay, so yeah, that's the tune that we're talking about today. So let's start going through it, top to bottom. Um, so at the very top, I've got my reference track here, which we'll come back to in a minute. The one we were listening to before. Um, got that in the channel off. Um, and then below it, I've got a channel of triggers that I'll come to back to in a second. And then I've got the kick and snare bus. So I'm going to go through how the tune is organized and how it's laid out. Because again, that's usually the point of these lessons, is more about the theory and the technique and why you're doing what we're doing, rather than like critiquing, like, are we working with the greatest piece of music ever written of all time, kind of thing. So what we got going on here is the song divided into these sections. I have the kick and snare bus. Again, I'll be doing Ableton stuff and showing some Ableton shortcuts. But if you're using any other DAW, it's totally fine too, because it's about the theory and the technique and practice, not necessarily about just Ableton special stuff, Ableton specific stuff. But so here, anyways, Control A, select all, and then I can close stuff, and you can see how I got it laid out here in the sidechain bus. I have the track divided up between sidechain bus channel with the sub, and then another bus with the kick and snare bust together in the group here. Those are the general three parts that I have it laid out into. And the reason why is because the kick and snare in a drum and bass tune, or tunes like this, you want the kick and snare to be independent in the mix, meaning they're very audible and very clear and have their levels managed here, and are also, because they're sharing a similar part of the music, a similar space in the music, meaning they're both like very punchy sounds that are loud and present, and that the rest of the tune is sidechained to have them in their own bus here, in their own group. And so what we're working with here was a kick from Kick 2 plugin. Was Kick 2 plugin. You'll notice here I've got this channel grayed out. This is something I often do when I'm making music. I've got these grayed out channels like this here, labeled inst for the instrument where I make the kick in the MIDI channel here, and I've got the plugin using Kick 2 to make the kick tuned to the track key of F. It's an F minor, so I've got the slope down and the stable pitch of the kick here as F. You can just hear that kick pattern. Got the amplitude adjusted of the length of the kick and everything like that. And then just a bit of basic EQing on it, pushing the low end up a little bit, bringing down 250 mud area a little bit. Yeah, some basic shaping, transient shaper on it, giving it some attack, some attack punch, sustain down a little bit, pushing the gain, the clipping on it a little bit up. Yeah, and then once I'm happy with that, I Control D, duplicate it, just duplicate the whole channel, and then right click and bounce track in place. This used to be called freeze and flatten, like flatten the audio. A lot of people use the term bounce, as in bounce it to audio. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. It's just that's what they call it. That's what they call it now in Ableton 12, is bounce in place rather than freeze and flatten, but that's what that is, same thing. So duplicating the channel and then flattening it to audio, bouncing it to audio here, and there you go, boom, I got my audio track printed there. But then I duplicated it, so I kept the original instrument channel here. And then to save that, in case I go back and make tweaks on it, changing the sound a bit while working on the project, I have everything grouped together like this. You notice if you're throwing plugins on the channel and stuff, and you've got things spread out a little bit like that, you see in these separate boxes, like this one's not in the audio rack. You can hit Control A to select all, or you can click and drag to select all of it, but Control A, Control G, or right click, of course, to group it. And you can throw it, you can throw everything in a group, and then I just minimize it and turn it off like that. And then I label the track as instrument and turn it gray and turn it off, and then work with the audio. So I've got the audio for the kick here. You can zoom in and see that it's got a somewhat long tail, but it's got a nice, long, sustained, high energy, loud part of the kick, you know, here. And yeah, then the snare. In this case, I was using just 2 samples. This is some, you know, drum and bass snare sample layered with a clap one. So I've got those 2 samples layered together at different volumes for the right mix that I want into a snare bus here. Here that clap is giving it a bit of a higher texture to it. And then, yeah, you know, it's the same thing like you've seen before. I just have the same with level, gain, stage management, and EQ with the snare, and then a transient shaper, you know, increasing that transient attack and adjusting it a little bit there. And then summed into a bus where I'm just doing the same kind of EQing management. In these cases with the kick too, I also have this stereo imager plugin on it, which is managing the stereo imaging width. So in this case, I have 2 bands set up, well, split into 3 bands with a lower, with just a bit of stereo width being applied to the middle band. You can see the stereo width in the field visualizer there, and I have it applied over here just a little bit there, and then the amount dry wet just dialed in a little bit. If I really cranked it up, you could hear what it sounds like, you know. It's like making it like way too artificially wide. But just adding a little bit of width in this case to the snare, to the body, the main body part of the snare. Not to the highs. You see I've got to drop down to about 5K because everything above 5K, you can hear it like this. You know, adding width to that kind of just high white noise essentially doesn't really gain anything, especially in the mix with everything else. And the same for the lower part. I just have it focused on the body of the snare, giving it a little bit more width. I did the same to the kick up here too. Kick. Yeah, I did the same to the kick, basically. To just give the kick and the snare the right amount of stereo width to them, and then sum together into the kick snare bus. Oops. Yeah. Something additionally I do on this one kick snare bus is just I'd probably put a limiter on it as well, because I can actually just get rid of this glue compressor because I'm not using the soft clip on it because I don't want to soft clip the transients of it, but instead I would just push this up with the limiter a little bit. Like, you know, just push it up a little bit there. You could clip the transients with it if you wanted to a bit, and link those and just make it like that. Yeah, and then I would be turning this back down to adjust it to the right level in the mix. But anyways, kick and snare into the bus there. Next thing, sub bass to sidechain with it. In this case, like I said, this is not like it's a minimal, like a deep minimal narrow roller kind of tune. It's not like a loud, like wow, 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 crazy respace lead driven track. It's really driven by this like wide and moving sub bass line here. So this is like the main kind of part of the idea of the tune here, the main body of the tune with this. Yeah, you can maybe hear that there's some like funny like little artifacts being produced by just some distortion and stuff in there that I would reprint and clean up. But yeah, so there's the sub. In this case, I actually, because the project's old, I actually was I didn't have the instrument channel, in the actual project anymore. So I just kind of recreated like what it's kind of like. It's basically just it was just something in Serum that looked essentially just kind of like this with a um, sine wave. I gave it a bunch of unison to make it wide in this case, random down to 0. Level being modulated a bit with this LFO wobbling back and forth. Noise to give it the sound of distortion, that fuzzy, distortion-like sound on sub bass. Some distortion, hyper dimension, a little bit of that for width, and a little bit of chorus for some width as well. EQ boosting some of the low mids and just scooping a little bit of that high mids, and a multiband compressor. So is sounding kind of like that, basically like something like this. I mean, yeah, it's obviously not exactly the same, but it was the same basic idea that I had just, done something different with. Trying to match a sound exactly with synthesis is like pretty hard. It's a lot easier and more fun to actually just make something like similar to it. But anyways, so I had something like that. You can really hear, it's the same kind of thing with these high steps like this, like. And then I just had some more distortion on it, just in this case, just on the mid scooped part of it here with Saturn. So I'm boosting that high part that has the overtones in the middle that make it easier to hear, and give the more the identity than just the clean sub bass. Yeah, again, same principle with the image with management. In this case, I've got the width of I don't really need to even, but in this case, I've got the width of the lower frequencies below, 100 or so turned all the way down. I gave some more width, around creeping into 100. You can see this slope of where the crossover is for these two frequencies. I've got that set around 95 to 100 sub bass range because I wanted that width in the bass. And again, just have that applied, not 100%, but a little bit. Yeah, again, the highs, just the above 5 or 6K, the high, just noise like that. Is not being stereo enhanced because it doesn't really serve any good purpose to make it wider. So yeah, that's what the sub was like basically, but obviously it came out a little different, and I didn't have the actual original instrument saved. But yeah, that's the sub there. So together with the kick and snare sub, I just have it in its own channel, and you can see in the bass that sidechaining was already done to it, where you see where the kick hit is right here, and then down there you can see that gap, right here where the kick hits, there's the other kick hit, and here, and so have clean side chaining done. And yeah, and so and you can see that's already been done to this base track, but I still have the sidechain on it to demonstrate and do that function a little bit. Anyways, got shaper box method of sidechaining in this case, with one for the kick and one for the snare. Two different sidechains happening. So those are getting their information to sidechain from these triggers up here. Now this is where I went through and I recreated, well, when you're making a MIDI instrument line like a kick or a snare, it's really easy to just take your kick pattern that you've programmed in for your VST here and then just copy it and paste it into a new blank MIDI track with MIDI channel with nothing on it. But then it's being sent here. It's being sent to channel sub 01, and then below it, where in sub 01, it's being sent to shaper box 3, the first shaper box. And then I have the same process repeated for a snare trigger being sent to sub 01 shaper box, the second shaper box here. So these are just copies of the pattern played by the kick and the snare in blank MIDI channels, playing no sound, but you'll see it lighting up here, you know. And then that MIDI trigger is being sent to the shaper box sidechain here and sidechaining it with control on it. In this case, you know, I've got the kick being fully sidechained 100% here, and then the snare a little less, you know. But yeah, that's the clear sidechaining of it. And also the kick and snare is coming through really cleanly. And yeah, that's the sub. And then carrying on with sidechain, everything else, the rest of the sounds are all put into this other group, the third group, just labeled as the sidechain bus. And that's where you've got everything else in there with a sidechain rack on it, and that same thing being done with shaper box again. Sidechaining, in this case, it's not being 100% ducked for the kick or the snare. Now I just have it to taste at about like 60-some%, just to duck the everything else in the track enough that those kicks and snares come through, you know, still punch through cleanly. And yeah, you see that up here, or in the shaper box, again, I've got it set at the timing set at a quarter of a measure here, and up here it's faint. It's real faint, but you can see this is 1/16. This line right here is a 16th note, and you go into the grid of the notes that it's, you know, the kicks and stuff that it's triggering. You know, this is the 16th note is that section, you know, here, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, and this one here, and then there is 1, 2, 3, 4 of those in the 1 to 17.2 bar, you know, this one measure of music here. So the 16th note is the length of the trigger being set, and the length of the slope of the essentially the release of the sidechain. If you're ever visualizing attack and release of a compressor, this is what it is. This first slope of the compressor going from 0, because up here is this level up here is full volume, you know, is no compression, full volume. And then the attack is the quick attack dropping down all the way here to, you know, it says minus INF for minus infinity. This is minus 6 dB. This is minus infinite dB. Yeah, they just say that to indicate like full volume reduction. And you can see down here, actually, in this spot, when I put my mouse back there, it'll say 3.58 milliseconds that's the attack time of the compressor of this side chaining, essentially. Now, this isn't a compressor machine. This isn't a compressor plugin like a, like an actual compressor or a compressor VST, but it's doing what a compressor does, where it's shaping the volume. Because if you see up here, Shaperbox has a lot of stuff you can do. They have all these different things you can like filter. They have a compressor, they have reverb, all this other stuff you can do. But I have the volume shaping one selected because that's what we're doing with this case of a compressor just doing side chaining. We are automating the volume. We just want to be turning down the volume every time that kick and snare hits. And so that's what we're doing with this attack set here. And then the release is this slope going back up here, back up to full volume once we get past that, up to that 16th note of timing. And especially the release, but both these times, especially the release time, if we really stretch it out, make the release, quite a bit longer, then you change how it sounds, how long it takes the bass and stuff to fade back in to full volume after the kick hits. And that's something you do for taste as well too, and style of things, when you want to, it'll be shaping how the bass sounds in relation with the kick and everything. So anyways, moving on. So that's how the side chaining is being done in this case. There are other methods I talked about before, like I talked about this method where you're just making a click track that is replicating what, this is just the snare. I deleted the kick one accidentally, but you just have, or you have the click track going, and then you can be side chaining with the with a compressor plugin like this, like this one I've shown here before. Then you can have it set to the side chain trigger and just be getting that trigger like that here, you see. So yeah, other ways to do it. I'm using the Shaperbox method in this one. Oh god, was my Ableton freezing? Okay. All right, Ableton. So sidechain bus, everything else, you can hear I've got that. Is that it? No. I've got that other synth sound that's adding to the. We'll work our way down to that. So in the sidechain bus, I've got the percussion group, all the percussion drum sounds like hi-hats and stuff, all the different hi-hats and things like that. Like this one, I have it summed together actually with a couple different patterns playing in this one channel, as you can see. Normally I wouldn't do that. Normally I would keep, it's good practice to keep separate sounds in separate channels so they can be EQ'd and managed appropriately independently. I don't know why, but in this case, I had them all summed into, well, I had just done that and then printed it into a summed channel, just a piece of audio like this, so you can see these multiple different pieces of a hi-hat patterns together, but like this, going from the click to that to yeah, same thing, another channel. This one. Just some goofy patterns, like when you listen to these patterns on their own, you're like, what kind of rhythm is that, But when you listen to it in the complete tune, it just like it, I don't remember how I came up with that. I think just experimenting, but main kind of break that gives it flavor is this one. This is a break that I made in some method, but you can just hear what it is though. It has those sharp loud, kind of noisy hits in it that really punch out in the drum mix and give it an identity in the percussion mix. This part. Yeah. Yeah, a few more percussion parts like this one, just loud, kind of, or just noisy hit, I mean. This one's like a ride. Yeah. Some of these are samples, like I guess this is from a sample, pack, I guess. But then other stuff I made in some drum program. Other examples of how a lot of these are just noise synth stuff. So, for example, this is how I made percussion one, like one of these percussion sounds was just this. Again, I actually got this in my instrument group, just turned off because I'm not using it. But here, percussion one, and then this was done, yeah, just using a noise oscillator, noise hit, noise on top, sine waves, and then a noise wave on top, just high pass filtered, and with the time on the operator synth being modulated to give a longer and shorter hit to it. That's this one. The flanger on it. Flanger is just kind of like spreading out the sound a little bit more, and just so I've got that noise hit combined with just some white noise sample here, like, and then this was just the audio printed from that synth. So yeah, just together like this. What was the other percussion thing though? Some of the simplest way to make like hats, yeah, stuff like this, the like hi-hat sounds and stuff is just with a noise oscillator, and just shortcuts of noise like this. I mean, it's pretty basic. That's what a lot of people will use though to make kind of like techno style hi-hat sounds as well too. And then I just had some other, like a sleigh bell sample thing here there. Really quietly, with the noise hi-hats. Yeah, so just using some different percussion samples and different methods to build some different percussion lines together. Like this was all percussion 3, and then this, I had percussion 2 with some other stuff happening, like this. Yeah, using a combination of samples and stuff that I synthesized using a lot of noise sounds. Yeah, into a few different percussion groups, and then using those percussion lines in my percussion bus to give drum variety flavor to the arrangement, like this. Yep. Yeah, like oh, that's right. This sound, this just like double hit, this like doof doof kind of. But in the end of the phrase of this, in the end of the phrase of the music of this part, it really kind of helps like pump up the energy and like push it forward. This kind of pushing forward sound. So that's the percussion bus, and then yeah, oh, I have the shaper box 100% side chaining going on in this case for the snare, because I wanted to duck for the snare hits because not so much an issue with the kick, low frequency kick, high frequencies of hi-hats and percussion, much more important for the snare, right? The snare is sharing a lot of that same frequency territory with the high percussion sounds, so I want to have it ducked for the snare drum to punch through and sound clean. So I have that happening there. Which, oh, by the way, before I forget, so again, in that example of where I had the triggers, and then in that case, you have to have a different trigger, a new copy being made to send to each one, like this one here, it's being sent to the percussion bus in this case. And then, remember I showed the example of where the attack of the volume shaping in the sidechain was here in the bottom, and if you hover over it or see, you can see that it's 3.58 milliseconds right here. So just under 4 milliseconds. So then to offset that attack time, because in this case, I want it to be really cutting the sound exactly, even the tiny bit before the drum hits, not 4 milliseconds after. So I've offset the trigger down here, opening up the channel view, or the fader view, I mean, or you could just, go back here too. The fader view, and that down here in track options, turn on the track options and you see all these trigger channels that I have here, the triggers for the kick and snare. I have them all delayed by -5 millisecond offset. So that means that a negative value, a positive value is offsetting them forward, a negative value is offsetting them backwards. So these triggers are offset -5 milliseconds to make up for that decay, for that attack time of the compressor. And you might be thinking, well, why have the attack time at all then of the compressor? Well, because you need that little fade in of the attack in something like that. Otherwise, it can generate audio clicks. If you have something like instantly triggering and happening, it can just create little artifacts, little clicks, unwanted. So you need that tiny little fade in of a few milliseconds, and then that's being offset by this timing here. So yeah, so there we go. And then back to the arrangement. Next section is atmosphere bus. It just had like pads and different things like this being played in this kind of similar group. Some noisy stuff. Yeah, these two were from Contact patches that I don't have the same version of Contact anymore. I don't know, they didn't reload when they loaded the project. They're just something cool in Contact that I found. This is other stuff from synthesizers and just stuff that I made just to make this kind of atmospheric, ethereal sounding, noisy stuff here. What else? I got a reversed a reversed cymbal hit here, classic fade in, like it's just this. Yeah. This weird, some other droney stuff here. This. Yeah. Yeah, this one for sounding kind of strange and like, not that loud or anything. You can hear how this kind of whoa, 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 whoa sound adds to, it fits with the rhythm of the bass, and it adds to that sound in the sub bass, actually, if you kind of listen to that. Yeah, anyways, atmosphere bus, got those stuff grouped in there, and grouped because they're just similar sounds. And then I can do similar processing to them using, you know, the EQ and just how I want them to be fit in. Again, same kind of gain stage management you've seen before, basic stuff there. And then the volume overall being placed at -6 or wherever fits in the overall mix. The next I have is sound effects bus um, that just had a bunch of like noise hits and stuff like that going on, like this full cymbal crash with the fade out noise stuff. This thing. Yeah, a lot of little like subtle white noise movements. Because again, this is like this deep kind of minimal track, so it's not like in your face respaces the whole time. So a lot of these kind of subtle like, you know, white noise movements and stuff just seem to kind of fit with that, you know, like this. Again, these are like white noise. Like this is a white noise, noisy clap sound, reversed. This one, just a white noise kind of. Yeah, that's literally just a white noise oscillator going into a reverb, just, you know, fading out. This one, reversed white noise. Obviously with some kind of effect on it. This one, more noise. Yeah, but you hear how that adds to that part of the track, that. Okay, maybe not if you can't hear it actually. Let's Yeah, hard to hear directly, but a lot of that stuff, those movements are those like subtle movements, like as the track is, as it's going through that transition point in the piece there, having that white noise going, just kind of, it's part of the transition flow, and just especially with things like that, or risers, like these risers down here, they're things that you can kind of subconsciously hear or feel more than like directly hearing like the bass or something. But they add to the energy feeling movement of the piece, you know, like this riser. This one. Yeah, again, these are actually demonstrate how to make a riser. They're in the instruments channel. Here we go. Yeah, in this case, like, got a riser made from, I think I showed this once before possibly, but using the pitch envelope and just having this pitch envelope going up long and slow. And then it's working that pitch envelope and LFO. It's turned off, I don't know, but anyways, it's the pitch envelope is just rising the pitch from low to high, creating a riser. If you want it to be a downer, you flip it around the other way. Yeah, so I've got those effects things. Like I said, these are white noise things that I resampled or sampled, or that just put through a reverb here and EQ. Pretty simple stuff. Oh, the vocal. Okay, yeah, the vocal part. Can't forget about that. It's from the movie, the science fiction movie, The Sphere. So this is from part of this movie that I just recorded, where it's like Samuel L. Jackson talking to some other guy, you know, in the movie, and then I just put it through some. Where is it? Here. Nope. Here we go. Yeah. So I recorded it. No. Here's the original recording.
What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you?
Okay, I had already done some processing to it in that case, but what did I have on that? I hadn't printed the audio. I was using a vocoder here, and it's just being like the sound of it's being messed with by the vocoder, and then it was pitched down a little bit or something, and ended up with this kind of that was the too much reverb copy of it. Yeah, ended up with these little vocal lines from the movie, like this. Yeah, not the cleanest audio, but like you can kind of hear, what they're saying, and it's just how it goes, and just as it plays in the track. Yeah, I was using a little bit of OTT compressor on that. OTT, everyone's favorite. Well, not really, but definitely popular as a sound gradizer thing, people think. Although multiband, every time you insert a band like that split in the frequency band, and then you make it multiband by inserting these divisions in the overall frequency band. Every time you do that, it's inherently destructive because you're breaking up, you're splitting the frequency band into multiple parts. And so something like an OTT can make a sound sound really good and really loud in some cases, but it can also be what it is also inherently very destructive to the audio that you're using. And so it's best used sparingly. I mean, people that joke about like, oh yeah, throw the OTT on and crank it up, and it's like, yeah, that actually sounds like pretty bad, generally. But in this case, I'm actually using some of that destructive capability of the OTT. Normally, if you want to just kind of like spice up a sound a little bit, just like push the sound a little bit to make it sound a little brighter, a little sweeter, a little louder, like 10% is a good value, on the dry wet. 10%, 10 or 12, kind of max will like add to it a little bit without degrading the sound and making it sound worse actually. But in this case, if I have it turned off, you can hear this part. Oh, this part here. Yeah, but in this case, if I turned it up to like almost half here, it degrades the sound and thins it out a little bit, and actually was working in this case for what I wanted. Yeah, I mean, you hear what happens if I turn it all the way up like that. It sounds, bad. And of course, you can adjust the bands here. You can adjust the bands. You can like increase the mids or the lows and do all that shaping with this stuff too. Yeah. But yeah, a little bit of OTT on there. That's in the SFX bus, along with the noise effects, risers, and stuff in there. Yeah. Yeah. So sound effects bus. Last the synth bus. This is where instead of, like I said, instead of big resounds, I had a couple synth parts playing instead, like this one. Yeah, walking through the sound again. I think this was with this is where I was using this SH101 emulation by D16. Yeah, just a synth plugin that sounds like quote unquote an SH101, But as you can hear, reloading the project, it didn't save whatever patch it was using, so it's just back on the default, But Yeah, I just had a couple different synth hits plugged in that you can hear, like this stuff. Yeah, just with some, reverb on it and stuff. This part. Um, yeah. Yeah. So again, not going into the patch details and stuff. I just, was just playing around with probably some presets and other just messing around with just some basic synthesis sounds with this synthesizer for some reason. They're all like, like I said, they all look different, but they all do the same things. You got your envelopes here. Um, got your envelopes here and your LFOs and filter and your mixer and stuff here. Just playing around with some sounds that you like. And got these little hits, these little stabs and little lines going on like that in the synth thing, in the synth bus. And yeah, if I was gonna add some neuro sounds, I just started messing around with this a second before the lesson. If I was gonna add neuro bass sounds to it, I just threw in like some neuro bass recording of stuff I had in the past. This kind of like um, not the greatest sound design in the world, but just like I would just be thinking about adding in little neuro bass hits in certain areas like that, like this, like um, Ableton, Ableton specific time. If you have like a big sample like this that I've got, that's like this whole sample like that laid out, and then so I drop the sample in there like this, and then turn the whole thing off, and then with the 0 key, and then turn on the little part where I want it to hit, and then if you hold down Control Shift and then you see your mouse turn to this little hand icon, you can drag and move the sample inside that little window and then move it around to get something that sounds good, like that you like the sound of, and what's that cool? So yeah, so you see that's how a lot of the complex neuro kind of bass stuff goes by layering too, of like finding a moment, like recording a bunch of noisy bass into a long sample and then going through and in little hits of it and finding something that sounds good in a place where it matches and sounds good, like this little sounded maybe cool here. Yeah, that kind of. So I'd be, if I was continuing to work on this track, I'd probably do something like that, adding these little neuro accents to augment and accentuate the bass, make it more interesting in parts. But yeah, that was just an example of that, of what I would maybe be doing additionally in that case. So why is this sub down? Oh, that was weird. That got dragged down here accidentally somehow. Okay. So yeah, those are the different parts. Percussion bus, atmosphere, SFX, synth. Sub was supposed to be up there. Yeah, that's how the track is laid out. And then again, if you recall, going back to the previous lesson that I had, I was discussing how mixing becomes a lot easier, a lot more straightforward, and just better sounding when you have managed the sound and the level of each individual instrument and part of your song when making it, and then you are placing it in the mix via the final output overall volume of the channel that it's coming through via the fader. So like, I was showing the example of how like when you have a sound source made and then you're managing the gain staging, you're doing the EQ to shape the sound, and then in the end you are managing the level. And in things like drum and bass, when you have louder sounds, and I should say in electronic, in dance music, when you have louder sounds and louder mixes overall, you can be using some sort of clipping on the end stage to just ensure that when you push that sound up to its highest level, to a high volume level with some sort of clipping on the end. A lot of people in Ableton or any program like to use just like a saturator. They just like throw a saturator on the end too, because it's also doing clipping. Analog clip, whatever model you choose, is also clipping, and you can add a bit of drive to it like that in the end. That's just ensuring that your level of that sound of that channel is never going to clip above 0 because it's managed on the end by that saturation or that clipping. And then once that sound is pushed up loud, like say if I have this what is this sound here, and it's playing like, I can turn it up to where it's just clipping here, and then turn it back down a little bit. I don't have to clip it. Sometimes that can sound nice, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary. But now that that sound is being played consistently loud at a managed volume level, then I can manage the level of it in the mix via the fader of the channel that it's on. And then when you've done that for all the sounds in your track, in your song, the mixing is a lot more straightforward and easier because you've already placed those sounds in the appropriate place in the mix. You think of sound levels, you think of volume levels. Okay, panning left and right in a sound in a mix is straightforward. Left ear, right ear, panning the sound back and forth, left and right. But volume is generally what is placing the sound forward and back too. The louder the sound is, the more forward in the front, standing in the front of the crowd, it's going to sound, and vice versa. The quieter it is, the more in the back it's going to sound too. So once you've managed all your sounds with that level, like I've made this synth sound and then heard it in the mix and determined like, well, okay, how loud do I want it to be? And placed it at that level. In this case, it just happened to be that, 0, 1 or minus 1 or 0 level. And then coming out of the management, gain stage and EQ management, same kind of management in the bus as well. Then the mix down is more straightforward, like I said, because you're not making a sound and not thinking about it and then going back through to mix it and be like, oh, now I have to know what do I do with all these different volumes and stuff. No, that's already been done in the stage of making the sounds in the first place. So with that all done, we got all these channels, all these buses going through the sidechain bus, which is using this effects rack of oh crap, I didn't even do that yet. Okay, this is using a system that I'll go into more detail with about sometime in the future. It's a trick that just got a line from a friend too, and heard about using ring modulation as a sidechain method, which is just some cool goofy stuff you can do. But in this case, this has to be set kick snare bus. This monitoring coming through here, and then it's playing in here like that. I'll go into this technique in the future sometime, and then the these thing. I forgot I didn't have this set up. So you see back to my comment in the past about labeling things accurately, because when you're searching for it in a big list like this, I mean, this is a long list too, because I also have all the I have like all the instruments as well as the audio channels in it. But that's why you label things carefully so that you understand, can find what you're looking for in the long list. Um, Shaper, post effects, yeah. Okay. Anyways, so we got our side chaining here that's going through the two shaper boxes. And it's also doing this rig mod sidechain method, which is pretty cool, but I'll talk about that in the future sometime. Yeah. Okay, so going into the mixing stage then, the final mixdown part for the final few minutes we've got in this lesson here. Just going to go through how simply that this is mixed together. As you can see, it's this stacked tier of channels of all the individual channels going into their respective bus. And then those buses will come out as their own channels. Oops. As their own channels into the sidechain bus, which then is its own channel being mixed with these, this sub instrument isn't being used, down to these three, the sub, kick, and sidechain. And then all those are going into the main master channel. So after we've done the gain stage management and the management of all those channels like we just talked about, just that simple repeated process of gain stage management, EQing, and again that final level management with a little bit of makeup gain and some form of clipping on the end. Clipping not necessarily happening, just being set that nothing will ever clip over in that case. And then all coming out to the main master channel. And here I've got a rack of some third-party plugins from this company called Acoustica. I'll just walk through the basic concepts of what I'm doing though, because it's still a universal concept. This is saturation. This is low saturation and high frequency saturation. Just have a bit of saturation turned up. Saturation is just adding harmonic content to it. A lot of saturation is distortion. That's what distortion is. Distortion is just saturation turned up, a lot, so that it adds a lot of harmonic content and actually distorts the sound. So just have a little bit of saturation happening here, just kind of thickens the sound, saturates it, thickens it with other frequencies. I run this to another plugin that's doing a little bit more different flavor of saturation on there, just tiny little ticks from these knobs here, not that much. And then it's going into an EQ. This just has a high shelf, low shelf, and 3 middle bands that are just set to EQ different points. The volume being managed coming out, turned down here into this multiband. This is a multiband plugin divided up into these under 100, 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, and 10,000 up. Simple 4 bands like this. That's just lightly multiband compressing these different levels. And you'll see when I run it that it's you can solo those different parts and hear what they are. But in this case, keep in mind this point right here, like most of this one was hitting, this is 1 dB. This is minus 1 dB. So most of them are hitting around 0.5 to 1 dB. But, it's not very much. And then up here, you see they're also only 33% wet. So it's only a third of that actual effect happening as well. So this is just really lightly massaging the sound kind of with multi-band dynamics. Multi-band meaning, how the sound is split into these multi-bands. And then they all have this threshold of 0, just like a compressor, and they are compressors. And then when the sound is too loud and crosses over that threshold, it turns it down a corresponding amount, and it's split into multiple bands so it can manage the volumes of different sections of, the whole sound. Um, but again, the thing about multiband being destructive and damaging your sound by splitting it into these different frequencies, it's only being done a very little bit, and here only at 33%, Um, it's not like multiband is always bad or anything. It just can be overdone and can damage the integrity of the frequency spectrum that you're dealing with. But yeah, just a little bit of multiband massaging kind of going on in final mix. Going out to this final clipping management plugin. There's a little bit more saturation here. You can see I just have that turned up. Compressor, the threshold turned down to just trigger like 1 or dB or so of gain reduction here. Makeup gain turned up. Going into this clipper, it's just clipping a little bit. Here you can see that in action. Like yeah, this is a clipper plugin that's clipping the sound on the end. And then it's going into a limiter where I just have a limiter cranked, to hear it at the end. Like and again, the limiter can be helpful for if you crank it up with the limiter, like push it up like a master will, because this I wouldn't be smashing it with the limiter this much if I was exporting the track to be mastered by a professional, by a separate mastering process. I wouldn't be smashing it with the limiter this much, nearly. But this is just a way also of checking, like, well, what does it sound like? I mean, we're making drum and bass, right? We want it to be loud, competitive loudness like other drum and bass tunes. So what does it sound like when you do that? Not only is it nice to just hear it like that when you're working, a little bit louder. I mean, but it also can tell you some things about the mix. Like I've mentioned before, if you smash it with the limiter, what happens to the sound? Just do certain things like fall apart. Do certain things sound bad? It can indicate some problems with your mix too. Like, in other words, crank the limiter up and start to hear what happens to the sound, what sounds bad, and then go back and maybe there's some fixing to do to that part, to that point. So in this case, we crank the limiter up a little bit, see how it sounds. I mean, it sounds okay, so yeah. And then last is I have this visualization spectrum analysis plugin. This one's Vision 4X. It's just pretty fancy. Vision 4X, because get it for different parts. But it's pretty good. It's a plugin made by Noisia, and it's just really helpful. It has these different things. A big one is it has this reference curve here, this blue band. This is a reference that you can set according to different samples taken from different music genres. Like you could do techno. Let's see, what does it say? Is a techno reference or dubstep, and you see how that changes. And that's just giving you a reference of average loudness levels of certain genres of music that were sampled. And so you see here from high to low frequency where your sound is hitting in that spectrum, in that level, the top, the far right side of it being 0, being like over 0. So anything over that is being clipped, being limited. And it's also corresponds directly left to right across here with the colors on this spectrum map here, where you can see the hits being you can see the parts of the music being visualized in a 3D or in a kind of faux 3D spectrum. And then down here, this is the kind of stuff where a lot of people are used to seeing the visualization of the music. Down here is the stereo field image with like left, right, and this showing your stereo width and stuff here. And so listening to the track with that, before or after the limiter shows you different things. If you're listening to it before the limiter, then it's showing you what's going to be limited once, what sound is limited when you crank it over the line here. But if you put it after the limiter, then it's also just showing you what that limited sound is looking like. So yeah, you can see, okay, some problem areas, that you want to address. Maybe you have like some highs peaking a little bit much, and then high percussion sounds, these high kind of sibilant kind of sounds like this that would be addressed. But yeah, that's just another way of looking at the mix overall. This is a very helpful tool. And things like it are very helpful to visualize the sound, the mix, so that combined with your ears and what you're hearing, and then of course combined with the one and only, the holy, OP, goated technique of using a reference track, which, the reference track is helping you make decisions about what is your reference for what sounds good anyways, how do you even want it to sound, right? So I got a similar kind of drum and bass tune in a separate channel here. Again, you'd be playing this not through your main channel, because then it would be going through your mastering chain or your mixing chain and all that. You'd want to be playing through the extension out here, so just directly out of your sound card, so that you hear it unadulterated by the mixing that you're doing. But if I do that, then you guys can't hear it on the stream. So in this case, I'm just going to turn off the mastering chain for a second and listen to it. Here is the reference. Yeah, so reference it. Yeah. So and then, like I said, notice about reference tracks. Notice things like, oh, in this case, I noticed the percussion, like the drums, like hi hats and stuff, are a lot louder, a lot more forward than in my mix. Compared to my mix. Then, I can turn that back on. Yeah, things like that. Okay, percussion could be louder in the mix. Things like, how loud is the bass? That kind of like details of the bass, that kind of like womp, part of the bass. What does that sound like? Then go back and check details like that. Yeah, and then, back to now. See, ideally, to do this technically properly, you'd want to have the levels matched between your track and the reference track, so that your ears don't have time to adjust in between. So ideally, the way you'd want that is, like I said, have it set up with going through the extension out, not the master channel, and then having the level adjusted so that when you go back and forth between your mix and the master, if you go back and forth playing like yours, soloing back and forth, you'd want to have it the same perceived volume. There are actually plugins you can get that help you do that help you volume match things for referencing perfectly. But in this case, because I'm playing it through the master channel, so you guys can actually hear it, that won't work. But that's what you'd really want to be doing, is being able to just bounce back and forth, a solo on and off, back and forth between the reference and your mix, to notice things like, how loud is the kick? How loud is the snare? How loud is the bass? How loud is, the synth leads and stuff? Just all those questions you have about mixing, listen to your reference track. The reference track also is the way, it's the only way to deal with the acoustics in your room, or however you're listening to your music, the headphones you're using, the speakers you're using. Everyone's heard, all music people have heard about, oh, the professional studio with the professionally, acoustically treated to make, and all the dangers of that if you have like resonant spots or dead spots and frequencies, the way that speakers in a room affect the sound because of how the sound comes out and literally bounces off your walls and bounces around, changes how it sounds dramatically. But the thing is, your room and your speaker setup or your headphones you're using, it's doing that to your music and it's doing the same thing to the reference track. So that's where the reference track is your guide to making those mixing decisions, because say the acoustics in your room are terrible and they have bad response to them. Well, they'll do the same thing to your reference track, so you can trust that. But you can trust that the reference track is having the same effects done to the sound as your track, and that's one of the big benefits of using it, is saying like, well, how does this sound in the reference track, and then how can I replicate that in my mix, and then it'll sound the same regardless of what headphones you're using or something or whatever. So, and granted, there are some more subtleties and stuff like that to it and whatever. You can have certain frequencies in a track, in the reference track or yours, that just aren't there, and then they react differently and whatever, yada yada. But generally, what I'm saying is true. A reference track is your guide for the mixing decisions, because again, without a reference, how do you know what sounds good, quote unquote? And a super common mistake people make is they're like, well, I'm making dance music, so the kick and snare has got to be loud, bass has got to be loud, and then yeah, but in comparison, they're way too loud. You can hear in this case, like, how loud is the kick? This one is a super quiet kick, I know, actually. Um, Turn that off again. So listen to the kick and the snare in this case. Okay, it's not super quiet. That was the other one, but yeah, but still, how loud the kick is. Just that poof. That punch that is kind of equal. It's kind of in the middle of the mix. This isn't like a big like boom that like punches through the mix or something. It's. So that's how you can see. Like I've got my kick. The kick is clipped. The kick is clipped at 0. Here. Um, but then the channel is at -4, and then the bus that it's coming through is at -6. So the kick is not that loud in the mix, but you still feel it. Do you feel it? Well, let's check. Let's check and see how it compares. Yeah, it's plenty loud. So okay. Anyways, yeah, so that's getting to the mixing decisions. And I had using a reference track for it. Again, I had discussed that in some previous videos too. Then if you wanted to print an audio version of it, you would do that with a few different purposes, like is this something you're being sent? Is this something you're sending to have mastered, to be released? Well, then don't smash it with the limiter. But is this something, a demo that you're sending to as a demo to someone or your buddy or something, saying, hey, check out what I made? Yeah, sure. Then limit it, push it, maximize it a bit with a limiter and get that good sound to make it, sound better, like how you want it to be. And is this a dub plate that you're going to be playing in a DJ mix as an unreleased tune tonight? Oh, then pump it, smash it, make it competitively loud with the other tracks you're going to play, so that you're not dropping it in the mix alongside another drum and bass track, and it's like, oh, why does it sound so quiet and so weak? So yeah, depending on those goals and how you want to be exporting it with different processes, and yeah, that about covers it. Yeah, I think that's everything. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed the walkthrough of this tune that I made as an experiment for fun a while ago. It was fun to get back to it and just revisit it, kind of. And yeah, it's a fun little tune. And yeah, of course, if you guys have any questions, anything like that, let me know. And then until next time. All right.